sanctions against the July 3rd coup that deposed President Mohamed Morsi. The latest deaths include several dozen detained Muslim Brotherhood supporters, this during a prisoners' riot at a transfer. And the 25 off-duty police ambushed in broad daylight in their minibuses in the Sinai Desert by alleged Islamist militants. Now, there's several fronts, both inside Egypt and abroad. There's Europe, where foreign ministers will meet Wednesday to spell out a common position on the bloodbath there. And the U.S., still tiptoeing around use of the word coup, which would mean automatic sanctions, and which is now pondering whether to suspend delivery of Apache helicopters. Earlier, the Saudi foreign minister Monday pledging to make up the shortfall of any Egypt sanctions from the West. We'll chalk up the relative weight of those outside players on both the short and long-term outcome of the Arab world's most populous nation. Today in the France 24 debate, while Egypt burns, and with us to talk about it from Cairo, correspondent Ashraf Khalil. Welcome back to the France 24 debate. He teaches at Georgetown University in Doha. Abdullah Al-Arian joins us as well. Thank you for being with us. From Boston, Massachusetts, Yoram Meital of Israel's Ben-Gurion University of the Negev. And former U.S. State Department official William Jordan is with us in the studio, as is France 24 International Affairs editor Virginie Hertz. The France 24 debate, where you can always join the conversation on Facebook and on Twitter, our hashtag F24Debate. Now, amid the return of the army to the fore, just before we go into the diplomatic shuffle that's been going on this Monday, this news that's come out of Cairo, that the longtime strongman Hosni Mubarak has come a major step closer to freedom. A third out of 4 cases dropped against him. Ashraf Khalil, how close is Mubarak to walking free?
Probably not that close. I think it would be hard to imagine, especially in the current circumstances when there's all this talk of a counter-revolution and the government is motivated to show that the ousting of Morsi was not a step backwards, but a step forwards. And I can't imagine a worse message that could be sent to the world and internally to Egypt than having Hosni Mubarak walk free. I think the powers that be here in Egypt will move heaven and earth to make sure that does not happen, because that's just a terrible message, especially right now.
All right, so they're concerned about the message it sends abroad. More generally, how concerned are the authorities right now about the message being sent abroad?
Honestly, it feels like they're more annoyed about it than concerned about it. There has been a definite concerted effort in the last 3 or 4 days, maybe the last week, to engage the Muslim Brotherhood in the battle for international public opinion. The Brotherhood was kind of a step ahead on this, in that very early in this crisis, which has been going on for 6 weeks now, the Brotherhood, I think, recognized that the majority of the country had turned against them and that they weren't going to convert anyone inside of Egypt. So they focused almost exclusively on foreign correspondents, international governments, international human rights groups, and waged a fairly effective campaign to rally public, international and governmental opinion internationally. The Egyptian government was a little bit late to that clash, but they're trying to catch up. You're seeing, if you watch Egyptian state television, suddenly there's graphics in English saying Egypt fights terrorism. One of the most prominent private satellite channels, and one that's been heavily pro-military, suddenly a couple of days ago started running a separate channel with an English language translation of what was being broadcast. So this internal battle is becoming an external battle for public sympathy, for governmental sympathy, and for human rights acknowledgement.
All right, so a battle for public sympathy. Abdullah Al-Arian, let me ask you, listening to what Ashraf is saying, that battle for public sympathy, is it fear of sanctions?
I don't think there's any fear of sanctions. I mean, if we've looked at the military so far, everything that they've done has been with the expectation that there are no consequences for their actions. I think the United States, as kind of the leader in the international community, has basically made its position clear that they're not going to interfere, that they're not going to sanction Egypt. at least not severely, not in any way that's going to actually affect the U.S.-Egyptian relationship in the long term. I think there's too much at stake, given a lot of the interest that we're finding, in terms of the international community. We're also seeing tremendous amount of financial and diplomatic cover being provided by a number of the Gulf states to Egypt. We just saw an announcement from the Saudi Arabian government basically saying...
Well then, in that case, Abdullah, why the change of tack that Ashraf was describing a moment ago with the opening of those English language broadcasts, the messages in English?
Well, I think, the struggle for public opinion is always going to be there. I think that the Egyptian military, certainly in order to actually succeed with the counter-revolution, is trying to avoid as much international condemnation as possible, but that doesn't mean that they're actually afraid of any serious consequences for their actions. I think this is simply trying to smooth the way for the return of the old regime. We're already seeing that, given a number of the people that have been reappointed back into government, and of course now with the impending release of the former dictator himself. I think this is just kind of the final step in a complete counter-revolution.
All right, so you're saying that we might see the imminent release of Hosni Mubarak.
Well, there's no reason legally, at least, to hold him. I think they would have to create a new pretense. And of course, we're seeing that the entire political situation as it exists in Egypt right now has nothing to do with trying to hold any members of the old regime accountable. We've seen that in the inability to actually successfully try him and convict him, given the fact that the entire world witnessed him as being a brutal and ruthless dictator who robbed his country of billions of dollars and kept his people destitute, and of course committed a number of actual violent atrocities against his population, and yet there wasn't anything that they could actually try and convict him on. This is because of the remnants of the old regime that continue to remain powerful within the judiciary, within the internal security services, all of whom, of course, have now come together to overthrow the revolutionary government, or at least the Muslim Brotherhood government that came as a result of the revolutionary process. And then now, of course, we're seeing a complete resumption of the old regime.
All right, so disagreement there over whether or not the army could indeed free him soon. Now, Virginie Hertz, there was a meeting of EU ambassadors this Monday in Brussels. They're preparing a ministers' meeting, a foreign ministers' meeting on Wednesday. We heard some strong language over the weekend, most notably from the German Chancellor, against the army. Remember, again, we've had officially, upwards of 850 dead, close to 1,000, says the Associated Press. Do you get the feeling, do you get the sense the EU might act?
No. I mean, they try to say something, and they did, but the declaration, the statement today was pretty clear. Bernardino Leon said...
This is the special envoy of the European Union.
Exactly. In Egypt, says, we will remain a constructive actor and there are no sanctions. So that means that Europe is trying to push for something or to put some pressure, but they have no means to really sanction Europe. You know that it is Egypt. In last November, Europe promised 5 billion euros to help Egypt and to help Egypt to go out of this economic crisis. But none of this sum was given to Egypt. So now, if Europe says we are not going to give the money, nothing is going to happen really. It's a money that have been promised, but
this money has been pledged, but hasn't been delivered anyway.
Exactly.
It was a telling episode, by the way, when it comes to all of this, which took place just 24 hours ago here in Paris. It was the French president, François Hollande, speaking in the company of the Saudi foreign minister. His tone rather tough, but the Saudi foreign minister rebukes him.
Arab countries, Europe, France, we have a common responsibility to work so that the violence stops, so that Egyptian political authorities can take the roadmap as a reference for the coming weeks, and to allow the organization of elections quickly so that the Egyptian people can express their point of view.
We spoke about common views, about what is going on. We hope that common views will lead to a united stand about what needs to be done. I do not think that pressure on Egypt would work or help in restoring peace and national security.
William Jordan, so it looks like Virginie is saying not much is going to happen. There's one French diplomat who's quoted as saying that on Wednesday, perhaps there could be a review of defense or security agreements, but, quote, even that is complicated.
Well, I agree, and I think the problem is that everybody's realizing, and certainly in Washington, as was stated a bit earlier, I think it was by Abdallah Al-Arian, that there aren't a lot of good options here in terms of putting pressure or in terms of clarifying the situation and pushing the Egyptians back into, putting the Egyptian regime back into the mode of brokering some sort of a political transition towards a genuine civilian government, with new elections and a return to some sort of constitutional order. The problem Washington faces, I believe, is that every time it looks as though that is getting back on track and that the regime is moving things in the right direction, and we've been working very closely with Europe on this. I think people were pretty confident that it was going to head that way. All of a sudden something happens, and lately we've seen that it's been coming from the military to push the situation to an extreme. And with the crackdown that happened last weekend by the part of the military, it has tended to radicalize, I think, things, and has caused Washington then to have to scramble to figure out what to do. Hence you had the canceling of the Bright Star exercises. Hence you had some statements out of Washington and by President Obama indicating that other things could happen. It really is up to the Egyptians now. The Egyptians are totally in control of the dynamic of this situation. Washington and other outside players are not.
Yoram Meital, the New York Times reporting that over the weekend that the Muslim Brotherhood and the military authorities there, and there was close to being some kind of deal, and then suddenly, whoosh, it went away. What do you think? Why is it that there couldn't have been any kind of compromise?
A compromise between the U.S. and the Egyptian?
No, a compromise between the military and the ousted Muslim Brotherhood.
The Muslim Brotherhood. Okay, got your point. Well, I think that the divide within the Egyptian society is not only unprecedented. This is basically the most important issue that we can mark nowadays. I think that the efforts that we have seen trying to bridge the gaps between the parties are not ended. I think that even today there are efforts to try to bridge these gaps, although it most likely would not close this divide instantly. But I think that the party is aware that Egypt is in a very low ebb today, in a very problematic internal situation. And in addition, I would like to add a point to your first question about this media campaign. As I see it, the Egyptian media campaign is a counter battle, I would say, aimed to change or at least to reduce the impact of the position and stance taken by the Obama's administration. They try to comment more than to initiate a new campaign.
All right. So what happens or what's said in Washington, according to you, Yoram Meital, does matter. And you mentioned there the fact that there are still hopes that there can be some kind of discussion or breakthrough to stop this bloodshed.
Absolutely, absolutely. I would like to remind all of us that just 2 days ago there were this threat waving in the air to ban the Muslim Brotherhood, to take them out of the law in Egypt, and then to inflict harm to this historic and wide support political movement. This shuffled at least for today, and we do have signs that some efforts to bridge the gaps or to reach an accommodation between the current government and the Muslim Brotherhood are taking place now in Cairo.
All right, and the EU envoy, Bernardino Leon, when he spoke to reporters earlier Monday, he made a nod to that, hinting that brokering a deal between the Muslim Brotherhood and the army is, yes, still possible, he says.
We still think that there are democratic forces left, yes, and we will try to address them and to keep working with them constructively. We will respond to the current situation, but at the same time, as I said before, we will remain a constructive actor trying to promote a political solution. It will not be easy. It's a very complex situation. There are no easy solutions or easy way out, but the European Union will keep striving for this.
Ashraf Khalil from Cairo, when you hear that statement, what do you think?
I'm sorry, please repeat the statement.
I said when you hear the EU envoy mention that there is still the possibility of brokering something, that you have to remain open, that Europe's job is to be there to broker something, what do people in Cairo really think?
I don't think there's a lot of optimism for reconciliation here in Egypt, and it's actually almost worth questioning whether each side truly wants to reconcile, because there hasn't been, despite several days of back and forth diplomacy, including by the EU, there was really never a serious hint of any kind, even the shape of what a resolution would look like. Both sides were dug in. Both sides were drawing a red line around the status of Mohamed Morsi, the deposed president. The Brotherhood was willing to consider maybe passing on some of his powers, depowering him a little bit, or having early elections, cutting short his term. But all of those negotiations, according to the Brotherhood, start with Morsi returning to office. And that was a red line for everybody else. So I don't know that they ever got past that square one sticking point.
But as was mentioned a moment ago by Yoram Meital, they seem to have eased off on this idea of banning the Muslim Brotherhood.
Well, they're easing off on the idea. At the same time, they seem to be acting like they have every intention of banning the Muslim Brotherhood. I mean, that talk of banning them or outlawing them is something that's come up in the past 48 hours, 72 hours, and I think it's a negotiating point. It's something that they can threaten in order to back off from. But if you're the Muslim Brotherhood, I'm not sure that frightens you. The Muslim Brotherhood people have been saying since day one of this crisis that if this ends with us being banned and driven underground, we've spent most of our lives banned and driven underground. We're rather comfortable there. And if Hosni Mubarak couldn't get rid of us, they doubt that this government can ban them or make them go away.
All right, Ashraf Khalil, I want to thank you. I know that you have to go, but I want to thank you for joining us in this discussion. Virginie Hertz, on this point.
I would be pretty pessimistic, too, about this possibility of dialogue between two parties, even if the Muslim Brotherhood are not banned. The way the military regime acts, especially towards Morsi, the ousted president, is absolutely radical. I just want to mention an article.
And there were new charges that were mentioned today.
Yeah, exactly. The Serge Michel, who is an envoy for Le Monde newspaper, a daily newspaper, met the general, police general, who is supposed to judge Morsi soon. And when you read the charges, or the charges that exist against Morsi, it's just hallucinating. For example, they say that Morsi is accused of he wanted to sell 40% of the Sinai to the Hamas, that Barack Obama was absolutely okay with the situation, that Morsi was he wanted to sell the south of Egypt to Sudan and another part of Egypt to Ethiopia. So it's like a theory of conspiracy. These
or
arguments,
a bargaining position, as Ashraf Khalil was saying.
Yeah, but it's just too much probably to I mean, it's totally.
All right, we'll pick up on that divide when we come back, and it's a big one. You're watching the France 24 debate.